This is U.S. History Regents Review, Unit 1, Part 5. We finished off last video talking about the executive branch, which is led by the president and includes the vice president and his cabinet. His job is to enforce the laws. Now we're going to talk about the Electoral College in a bit more detail. This is how the president and vice president of the United States is selected for office. Again, the goal is to select the president and vice president. This is not a popular vote. A popular vote would be if they just counted up the total number of votes for each candidate and saw who won, given the votes for the entire country. But we do not do that. We use the electoral system, which was originally created by the Founding Fathers in order to prevent popular rule. Because remember, the Founding Fathers didn't really trust the American people to make the best decisions. So they wanted to remove the people a bit from that power by instead having them vote for electors. So if you look at this map, this is from the 2016 election. This shows the election between Clinton and Trump. You'll see that each state has a number on it. That number represents the total number of electors for each state. So technically, you vote for the electors who then cast a vote for president. Nowadays, what that means is essentially that whoever wins that state gets the whole state. So you'll notice, like New York, if we look at that, has 29 electoral votes. You can almost think of it like a point system. To win the presidency, you need the most points. You need 270 specifically to win. 270 to win. So if New York State is worth 29 points, then whoever wins in New York State, whoever has the most votes out of the two candidates in New York State, they get all 29 electors. It's a winner-takes-all system. So New York State has 29, which is a lot larger than the states right next to it, like Vermont has 3, New Hampshire has 4, because it's based on population. The number of electors is based on the number of senators, which is always 2, plus the number of members of the House. So in New York State, there are 27 congressmen, representatives, plus the 2 senators. So that's how we get the number 29. So you'll notice all the highly populated states have bigger numbers and are worth more in this system. So like California's obviously the highest populated state, so it has the highest number. It's 55. Texas is 38. Florida is 29. And then all these places, like in the kind of the western part of the country, that are very lowly populated, only have 3. That means they only have 1 member of the House to represent the entire state, plus those 2 senators. The only weird thing on the map you might notice, Maine, Nebraska is another one. They actually split their votes. So that's why you see the blue and red stripes. So some of their electoral votes went to Trump and some went to Clinton. But in this election, kind of the unique thing was that Clinton actually won the popular vote. So more people in the United States voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for Donald Trump. That would have been a popular vote, would have elected her to be president. But Donald Trump won the most electoral votes. So that's why we see this split here, because he won some of these states, which happened to all add up to more than 270. The third branch is the Judicial Branch. This is created by Article 3 of the Constitution, and it's the branch responsible for interpreting the laws. So it does not make laws, it does not approve laws, but it looks at the law, and what it does is it decides if it's constitutional or not. This power is called judicial review, the ability to determine if a law or an action, like an executive order, for example, is constitutional or not. This power was established in the court case Marbury versus Madison. That's the first huge court case you need to know. Marbury versus Madison created judicial review. The court essentially gave itself the ability to interpret whether laws were constitutional or not. This is their function. Another important thing to understand about judicial review is it also means the court can change its mind. It can change its position on certain issues. depending on the time, depending on the morality of the day, depending on who's on the bench. So the judicial branch is technically made up of a bunch of courts. There are several federal courts, high state courts, appellate courts that are all part of this branch, but the main court we typically think of is the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land. It has 9 justices on it. This number is not determined by the Constitution. That number has changed over time, but for many decades it's been 9 justices. And this picture shows you the current makeup of the Supreme Court. Now we're going to talk about some principles of the Constitution. One of the most important principles we find in the Constitution is a separation of powers and checks and balances. The goal is to make sure that no one branch has too much power. So this diagram, I think, shows both of these things to you pretty well. So if you look at the blue boxes, you'll see the responsibilities each branch has. So like we've talked about before, the legislative branch, it writes laws, it approves presidential appointments, ratifies treaties, it controls the money, it declares war. The executive branch can propose laws, it's in charge of the armed forces, it conducts foreign policy. Judicial branch interprets the Constitution, and it can review decisions from a lower court. So they all have different powers, separation of powers. This keeps anyone from being too strong and powerful. But they also can check each other's power. They can limit it. There's supposed to be a balance here. So you see all those arrows going between each branch to try to give branches influence over one another. So for example, the legislative branch might propose a law, but the executive branch, the president, can veto that law. He can reject it. But even if the legislative branch writes a law, the executive branch approves it, signs off on it, still the judicial branch can actually declare it unconstitutional. So it all comes back. The president has the power to pick justices who go on the Supreme Court, but the legislative branch might reject that choice. They can vote on it. The legislative branch could impeach a president. The legislative branch might impeach a Supreme Court justice. So again, they all share power. They keep each other from getting too powerful. This is an essential part of our democracy. We also have an important principle called federalism, also called a federal system of government. Certain powers are delegated to the national, also called the federal, also called the central government. They have delegated powers specifically given to them. However, all other powers are reserved. They're set aside just for the states to control. Anything they do together, any shared powers, are called concurrent powers. This is created so that states still have control over some of their own affairs, but they're also giving up some control to the federal government. The power of the federal government comes from the states. The federal government ultimately has supremacy, however, over state governments. So if we look at this chart, here's some examples. For example, only the national government, only the federal government can declare war. Okay, a state cannot declare war on another country. Only the federal government can coin money. We don't have different currencies for each state. They create post offices. They maintain our military. Those are things that are delegated to the national government. Things that are reserved for state governments include creation of schools. So all schools are locally managed, although the federal government has had increasing power over schools. All states establish licenses. So things like driver's license, hunting license, marriage license, all those things are regulated by each state. Setting up voting, setting up local governments. Pretty much everything that the federal government doesn't have delegated to it belongs to the state. However, some of those shared powers, including maintaining law and order, so having police, having court systems, passing taxes, and passing laws, are done by both the states and federal government.